Hello, and welcome back to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Arthur, PMW's Multimedia Editor. On today's episode of the show, I'm joined by Suzanna Chaplin, the CEO and founder of esbconnect. Suzanna is an expert on all things marketing, particularly driving sales and acquisitions and loyalty and customer retention and all those big things that are particularly relevant at Q4, peak shopping season. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Susanna, hello and welcome to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast studio. How are you this morning?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me here.
I have to say, it's the earliest we've ever recorded the Unlock podcast. We're doing this at around 9 a.m. Sorry to drag you out here so early, but it was the only way the schedules could align, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. And actually, it was quite a gift because normally I've got nearly a year, 1 year old, and she hasn't been sleeping. And thankfully, last night she actually slept all the way till 3:30, which is a blessing. Normally I'm up for hours overnight, so this wasn't too bad.
Oh my goodness, the old... you're also one of the first person I've heard refer to as a 12-month-old as a 1-year-old. I know a lot of my friends that are parents, they sort of go on by the month until they're about 6 sometimes. They've got 37 months now, actually.
I know, and you're totally like trying to calculate it. Also, you then change your age all the time where you're like, they're 2. No, they're not. They're like 18 months and things.
Well, that's terrific. Well, thank you for joining us. And I guess what is pretty much the afternoon for you then by that. So you'll certainly be more awake than myself. And I'm excited to have you here because we're going to talk about peak shopping season, Q4, which is pretty much upon us now. I was about to say it's right around the corner, but it is now October and you can pretty much say it's underway. Peak season for marketers and advertisers, brands, often get a little bit tense and nervous because a lot of expectation comes with Q4, doesn't it?
Yeah, massively. And I think especially like this Q4, and we've kind of seen the move over the last few years where Q4 was like October, November, December, and it feels like it keeps shrinking. But then I feel this year is going to increase to be October, November, December, and even into January.
Everyone's just like, we need as much sort of as many sales moments as possible and little deals and quick wins as we can, because I guess the broader economic outlook has been pretty turbulent for quite some time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing. And I think with the budget being moved from October, November, I actually think it's been a really good thing because I think that was stressing a lot of people. And then it was like, do we plan after the budget or do we plan before? Or it's forced people to go, no, let's just treat this like a Q4, get going October the 1st or before that and, run it as we would have.
That's a good point. Now, when it comes to strategic planning for Q4, you've mentioned there that, the budget's got everyone just fretting about what might be coming. But I suppose bringing it back to November meant that people couldn't afford to wait to begin their Q4 planning until after the budget had come. How early do you really think marketers should be planning for peak sales season? And if you haven't started yet, how far behind are you?
I think 2 things. Like, you should be planning early. Like, people are going to be buying in this season, and the way they're buying, I think, is changing and things are coming a little bit more considered rather than off the cuff because people do have less money. We can't hide from the fact that, there isn't as much money going around in the economy, so purchases are more planned. But I also don't think we should just think about it as Q4. It's like that slow walk that every year should be thought about as a year. And your approach to Q4 should be your same approach to Q3, should be your same approach to Q2. I think we're massively seeing this change in also the consumers and their behaviours. They know that a discount can probably come again next month. There will be another sale. There will be another voucher code. There'll be another place they can find that product. So that's where we're seeing like people like Aldi or, the value-led retailers, M&S to a certain extent, where they've just got that steady messaging all through the year and quite steady pricing all through the year. And people are going there because they know it's value. They know they're not going to get mugged off in a way that the next week they buy an item and then it's 50% off the next week. And therefore they're buying when they want to buy rather than this kind of, ebbs and flows and peaks and troughs where you might not get many sales for a month and then suddenly loads in a single weekend. You're never too late to start, but then I think you shouldn't be thinking like, oh, this is for Q4. You should be thinking, what do I want a consumer to think about me, and why should they buy from me all year? And then Q4 comes about, what products should I surface that are more likely to get brought in Q4 versus in Q1, Q2, Q3.
I suppose the interesting thing to take away from that is, because purse strings are tight for a lot of consumers, you could look at sales events like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Prime's got its big deal days coming up, and think that, well, a lot of consumers are going to be relying on those and they might be sort of saving budget to then splurge a lot of spend at that time. Conversely, there you've mentioned, if you've kept your prices a little bit more consistent and consumers know that reasonably reliably you're not just going to fluctuate one thing from one week to the next and they can purchase from you throughout the year, they'll be more inclined to do that. So my question is, do you think big sales events like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, are these worth jumping on for advertisers, or does it just need to be a smaller part of a broader approach?
I take it in two parts. So if you look at Prime Day, which we've got one, I think it's the 8th and 9th of October coming up, they've actually been smart there because it
might be like the 7th and the 10th as well. I think Prime Day is about 4 days long this year, so it's only getting longer.
Shows you how even the big players are changing. But if you think, they've done that quite smartly because it's just after September payday. And people are likely to be planning their bigger purchases earlier. So I might be buying my other half like a expensive TV, or, I might be buying my child a laptop. And so hitting it early and being like, okay, these are probably the bigger purchases that are going to take more of someone's paycheck, get it in October. After that one, they've got time to pay it off, etc. They haven't spent all their money on Christmas. I think planning that way is important. But then with Black Friday, I think it is an event, and consumers are trained into going on that weekend and buying. And also how it falls this year is around a key payday. Sometimes it's before payday. So people will be buying there. It's essentially one of the last paydays, unless you get paid early before Christmas. So it's always going to be a big weekend for purchases. But we've also seen there's a few things, like there's huge returns around Black Friday. There's a lot of, consumers feeling a little bit, again, using the word mugged off, because you go on, say, the Black Friday and you're like, oh, my item's out of stock. And then you go on the Saturday or the following week and your item's magically back in stock. And so people understand that it's slightly artificial. And then the worst one is, there's a big Black Friday offer, and then the week later there's a added 20% off. So again, it's leaving this distaste. So I think if you are going to use Black Friday, be really clear, like either it's a month-long promotion, or we are going to give our best offer on Black Friday, or we're giving this on Black Friday. So communicate it so someone can trust that offer and will spend with you on that weekend.
So really clear, consistent messaging throughout.
Yeah, 100%. But do use it. Like, it is a payday weekend before Christmas.
It's not one you can afford to miss. And you certainly don't want the board or the CEO and CFO look at you going, why have we wasted this opportunity? Consumers beginning their big shops earlier, that's something I've heard a lot the last couple of weeks as we prepare for the holiday season and the season of gift giving. Why do you think consumers appear to be more inclined to start making their gift purchases earlier in the year as opposed to later?
People have less disposable income now, so people are having to be more conscious around planning their spending. Like, everything is costing more. Like, food is costing more, holidays are costing more, childcare is costing more, and so everyone's getting probably to the end of the month with limited cash. And I don't think Christmas is cancelled by any means. I think people would still want a gift, and it's still a really important thing. You want to see people's face light up. You want to know you bought them something they actually want. So I think there, people are probably now looking at their spend and saying, I have X amount of spare income each month, so therefore I'll buy one purchase in this month, one purchase in next month. Whereas if we look, 4 or 5 years ago, there was more excess disposable income, so people could leave it to the last minute and do that shop.
Looking at the campaign side of things from the marketing perspective, what do you think the the data points that the marketers need to be particularly aware of when it comes to their peak season campaigns? And obviously these change dependent on the organization, but broadly speaking, what things become more heightened at this time of year that you might emphasize a little bit more in your outcomes versus things that you might de-emphasize slightly, purely because it's different to Q1 to Q2, Q3 in terms of consumer spending? I mean, obviously they have less income, but they will be inclined to spend more money in Q4 because they still want to be giving gifts and things like that, as you've mentioned.
One thing that I always think is really important to collect over this quarter is whether you're going to segment someone into your customer or a gifter. And I think it's just a really important thing because you'll have a lot of people that only buy from you because they're buying a gift. So maybe I'll buy from a men's shop for my other half, but then I won't want to hear from them for the rest of the year. That audience is valuable because they're likely to spend maybe 2 times a year with you, one for like Christmas, one for a birthday. But you need to put them in a different segment because you don't want to tell them about a product every single month that's not relevant to them. So one, collecting gifters versus your core customer. I then think you want to look at things like average order, lifetime value, return rates, because those things are important. Like, are you getting a higher average order value at Christmas, or are you getting a lower one? Because it would just make you think about what products do I surface? Is it better to put a lot of high-end products that raise revenue overall, or actually am I better getting lots of small, like quick wins, which gives me a lot of long tail revenue? So those things I think are important. And then returns rates, like everyone's like, oh, I did great on this Black Friday weekend. You know, we had our highest ever day in sales. But then you could find out that like 50% of that revenue churned because it was returned, you know, people buying multiple sizes, etc. So I do think that's important because that will correct what your discount strategy is going forward.
So looking at it from a bit more of a long-term lens, I suppose, is critical there. Identifying which consumers are going to stick around and you can sort of get repeat purchases from and make them a loyal customer, as opposed to someone who, might just pop up once or twice a year because they found themselves in the need for a very specific gift. I think thinking long term is something that the industry broadly fails to do at this time of year. You can get very sucked into, how do I stand out from all the promotional noise, and just it's whoever can yell about their deal the loudest is going to win. But then you might just have one very high peak and a complete plateau either side of it because you haven't collected any valuable data, you haven't then derived any insights that you can use to keep customers coming back and turning them into, loyal brand advocates.
This whole short-term, long-term view, the problem is at a senior level, people are like, we have to protect our margins, we want better loyalty, etc. And then they see revenue and they're suddenly like, quick, we need more sales in, which then comes down to like shove a discount out there. And then you get this quick reactionary, and then you're in this cycle that consumers only shop from you if they see a discount. I mean, I always call it like the Pizza Express effect. And so I think there's that kind of constant tension between those two things. But I think you've got to go like, we have to look at this as a long-term strategy. We've got to get away from the noise. What's the key things we need to hit? What's the key lifetime value, average order values, and how do we achieve it? And stop kind of reacting to being like short-term, like I've got to go and grab a discount. I've got to push this in order to hit that weekend sales target, which might give you the spike, but you then see the churn on those records or the lower AOV over time, etc., and your profit margins going down.
Hello, Performance Marketing Unlocked listeners. Host Joe here, interrupting you very briefly to put a call out for mailbag questions. Very soon, we will be recording the first Performance Marketing Unlocked editorial team mailbag, where we take questions from you, the loyal listeners. So please, if you have anything that you would like to have us discuss on the show, whether that be a topic or a specific question, please email it to performancemarketingworld@haymarket.com. Now, back to the show. Now, I wanted to touch on, you were kind enough to speak to us for our retail playbook, which has now been published. And you spoke to me specifically about the channels that marketers should be embracing this year, or ones that perhaps they shouldn't be investing so much in. And you were a big advocate for things like SMS, even email, video on demand, as opposed to some of those very modern ones we see popping up a lot, like using social media, for example. And I just wanted you to sort of elaborate for me about why you think some of the maybe less obvious channels are the ones that are really worth embracing at this time of year.
Noise and stickiness. So my big issue with social, like, don't get me wrong, like, I see the value of it. I use Instagram, I'm on the social channels. But the one thing that I find really interesting is the way they use your data when you interact with a brand. So I click on a brand and then suddenly 10 people are advertising to me with the same product, brands that I haven't heard of. So I would have gone from maybe like thinking about spending with one or two brands. So I'll give you an example. I was shopping for my other half for his birthday. I clicked on Mr. Mavis. And then suddenly I had these 10 other brands that I never even heard of, wouldn't have even considered. And it went from me being like, I might consider Mr. Mavis and October, to being like, oh, here's all these other ones. And then in doing that, I then came to this place where I had an indecision, because I was suddenly like, oh, which one is the best brand? And so what happened was, by advertising on social, that brand then lost me as a customer, because I had so much more choice, and then ended up not making a decision and going for another product completely in a different vertical. And so I think that's the problem with social, and also the costs are through the roofs. The CPMs are going up. It's getting more competitive. The second issue is the fact, like, it doesn't necessarily stick. So sometimes you see that ad and you see that brand and you're like, oh, that was really good. And you go back into your feed and you can't get there. And it's actually really frustrating when you're like, oh, I really like that, but I can't remember what the brand was called. Whereas you go into these other channels. So firstly, like, if you take something like video on demand, everyone still loves the Christmas advert, and you still remember that. So it is time where you can be creative, and maybe it's more costly to produce, but it's worth it, because people are actually waiting to see adverts, and they're not waiting to see them for the rest of the year. And then things like SMS, email, direct mail, there's a stickiness to them. Like, the direct mail gets left in the house, it'll be seen by everyone within. You
can always go back and find it if you need to.
Yeah, and it feels a little bit more expensive, a bit more special. I got something, a nice brochure through. Email, again, it's within there, they can go back to it. And SMS, again, it's in there, there's not as much noise. Obviously, I know he's going to advocate for email, but one of the things with email is the fact that there's that brand awareness element, plus you've got a lot of room to be creative. And what I mean about the brand awareness element is, when someone goes in their inbox, even if they don't open and click your email, they're seeing your from line and your offer. So M&S 50% off. They might not need to go in. Or you've got the room when they do open the email to put a lot in there. So it might be your gift guide, and it's like a page within that email that they can read through and get all the information. I know what the trends are, I know what gifts, etc. So there's more space with less noise. And that's why I think people should not be just rushing to be like, we should spend on social, and being like, what other channels are there where I can have room to speak to the customers in the way that I want to speak to those customers.
It's access to audiences is another element, because I certainly understand where you're coming from on the social front. That's the Instagram example there rings very true of a good ad pops up, but at that specific moment, I'm in the middle of doing something else, and I go, okay, I might come back to that. Then you can never find it again. Or better yet, you do click on the ad and it just opens up this entire can of worms, where all of a sudden you're looking at every different competitor. I might be like, I like running, so I might be looking for a new pair of running shoes, and I click on an ad for a pair of Nikes, and then all of a sudden I've got Adidas, Reebok, I've got Mizuno, I've got them all hitting me at once, and I'm just perusing an entire catalog. And even though it was a Nike ad that might have prompted me to get into that purchase funnel, ultimately I bought a pair of Adidas shoes, and they've just helped their competitor, and that's their ad spend down the toilet.
Well, that's what I find the most ironic is that your ad spend now fuels your competitors' awareness and purchasing.
Yeah. And whereas SMS, email, those are two that I think there's a lot more scope for personalization, and of course stickiness, as you said. You can go back to those. They don't vanish the second you leave them. The issue there is, I think, access to the audience, though. It's a lot easier to reach people on a broader scale across social media, you could just kind of hit your paid media spend and just funnel it out there. Whereas SMS, email, I mean, video on demand is a different one. You can access the audience of a broadcaster. But how can you, I know this is a lot of what you do at esbconnect is treating email like paid media almost. So how can people tap into these audiences that they might think they don't otherwise have access to?
Well, I put it in two ways. I mean, we have an email community, 17 million, which people can obviously come to us and use it. So a brand like, say, Clark's works with us, we create an audience and we send their offer out to our database and hopefully drive them sales or leads. But I think these channels are actually even more accessible on a lower cost level than people realize, because everyone has an email list, most retailers, brands, and there's the ability to go out to complementary brands and be like, could we brand swap? Like, can I send an offer to your email list and you send an offer to mine? It'll go into the newsletter content, that kind of thing. So one, that's a really low cost way, and two, it accesses an audience that you know is probably right for you and has been created well, is active, etc., because it's another brand that is hopefully complementary to your brand. And then there's also a whole host of publishers, like say you guys or whatever it may be, where they've probably also built up a email base, and that's another way you could go to them. Or they might have an SMS base or a postal base. You know, there's lots of ways that you can access that data. And yes, it isn't as easy as just logging on to Meta and, you know, sending an account. But I think if you just sat down for an hour and thought about who are the 4 or 5 people I could reach out to that would have sizable email, SMS or postal data databases, and negotiate a deal with them, and I'm pretty sure that you probably get as good return, if not a better return than you were.
And I think there's a benefit there to sometimes saying you need to just sit down for an hour and think about your audience, because there isn't always enough of that. And I think just deriving of, hold on a minute, let's sit there and be really considered about who is going to be most valuable to reach and make sure that we can reach them. Because it's one thing to just spam your social spend in the hopes that it hits the right people because you just cast a wide enough net. But if you can take a more considered approach, you're going to be reaching people that are far more valuable to you than otherwise just casting a really broad net. It's very much a quality over quantity approach in many respects.
Definitely. And I also think everyone's running so fast at the moment, like we're all short of time, you know, and there's a fear of doing something different because what happens if we end up with worse results. But I think if you just took a moment to be like, okay, let's look at what's delivering for us. Let's see where the audiences we're seeing success with, and let's think about where else we can get them. And if it's just spending a few hours one morning brainstorming that, I think you'll actually get a much better return than just being like, no, we're going to keep spending here. Like, we're not going to change. We haven't got time to look at this.
Now, final question for you before we move on to the Resell Me a Pen challenge to round out the show. You touch on results there, and I just want your take. What truly is the most important thing for an advertiser during peak season? You know, you might have a CEO or a CFO saying the bottom line, and you might have a brand marketer saying building awareness. I want to hear from you, Suzanna. What do you think is the most important thing at this time of year?
I will always say this, but first party data. You are going to get the most traffic to your site over this period, well, you should do, and you should get the most most purchases. Grab as much data as you can. Don't just think about getting conversions, think about a conversion being like, how do I get them to subscribe to my database? Like, how do I get them on my newsletter? How do I retain that person? Because that is going to fuel your advertising for the rest of the year. It will lower your costs because you can speak to them through your own CRM. It means that you can build out lookalike audiences on other channels. You can load those data into other channels. The power of your first party data, which I think, especially if we go into the changes with like ChatGPT doing purchases in a conversation, the only way you're going to be able to control your conversation, make sure you stay relevant, personalization and all of those things is through first party data. So yeah, I would say come out of Q4 being like, we generated this much revenue, this much sales, but we collected this much data is like really important.
Another long-term approach, Suzanna. I like it. And I think that's the way to go at this time of year. It's time now to move on to our Resell Me a Pen challenge, where The guest has got 60 seconds to resell me an outdated product or service of your choice. Before we jump in and I put you on the clock, do you want to reveal to myself and the listeners what it is you've chosen to resell today?
A wired telephone.
Why? Like a cord?
You call? Oh, yeah, that's what you call it. A cord,
like a landline telephone with a cord.
Corded telephone.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, cool. We're going to go with the wired telephone for today. That's what we're going to refer to it as. Maybe that's the rebrand it needs. 60 seconds, Suzanna. I'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds remaining and when there's 10 seconds remaining. But your time starts now.
So AI is going to change the world and we're going to get less connected with people. And I think people are going to value a human connection more. And the problem is with the mobile phone is that it's been overcome by WhatsApp, social media, and not really connecting with the person. When was the last time you actually dialed in a number and rang someone? And secondly, it disrupts conversations at home, wherever you may be in the office, because while you're speaking to someone, you might be on your phone. So if we brought back the wired telephone, it encourages people not to be on their phone while they're with people, but then it also encourages them to walk over there, take a moment and call that person and really invest in that phone call and be with that person in the moment. So I think it's about saying the phone was created to be the phone. The mobile phone was created to be the computer almost. Use the mobile phone for what it is a quick communication tool to get in, browsing the internet, searching, for things, and then use the phone as a way to connect with people.
Amazing. Well done there, Suzanna. And that's a terrific effort for one that I know was completely off the cuff as well, because you got here this morning and didn't have a clue what you were going to try and resell. And I think for coming up on the fly, that was a terrific pitch. And you hit immediately the things that appealed to me. And those that have listened to the show for a while will know I'm a bit of I love the allure of sort of these old school traditional things, like, your Rolodex and like a real like leather bound wallet and things like that. And something that I feel I just missed was, the landline and that old school phone where you ring someone up and you're on the horn to them for hours on end, and you just sort of, that could be your evening is, a 45-minute phone call with a friend. And you hit the exact thing of, yeah, I've got a phone, but that's like the 35th thing I might use it for is to call someone. There's a million other things ahead of it that it's, I use it for messaging, I use it for games, I use it for video, I use it for email, all sorts of channels. And like you said, people talk about video on demand having an issue with second screening when someone might see an ad and then they go on their phone. You might be on a phone call with a friend and you're not even giving them all of your attention because you're doing your Christmas shopping at the same time. And I think going back to the roots of when you call someone up, that's what you're doing. You're just on the phone to them. Because my parents used to talk about like having just real conversations and asking people out and almost going on like dates and spending time gossiping with friends. And it was as good as like hanging out at a coffee shop with calling someone up on their landline.
Yeah, and the art of conversation is going over time because you're almost like, oh, I look it up, I do this, and then you're out that moment. Whereas, yeah, I still remember from being like a kid where you used to like do your freeway calls and things like that. Be like, oh, I'll call this person in, and it was all exciting. Like, I've got a 3-year-old, and the other day we walked past a phone box, and he was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Oh." And I actually looked in it still did have a phone. I was like, oh, it's where you can call people from. And I was trying to explain to him the notion of reverse calling, where I'd be like, oh, like, for example, when I used to get home to the train station and I needed my parents to pick me up, but I had no cash, I would reverse call and ask them to pick up the call. And he was literally looking at me like, you're weird. And his 3-year-old
can't comprehend that this was a problem that people had back in the day. It was didn't have access to a phone. I needed to call people. I was out of minutes. I didn't want to run up my phone bill. I wanted to run up my parents instead. It's great. And it's certainly, I think there's something to that, the art of conversation. We used to pick up the phone. It would be like, who knows how long this call's going to take. I don't mind. I've got time and nothing else to do. Instead, someone calls you when you think, well, why haven't you just sent me a text? Do I really need to pick this up right now?
And the whole voice note thing I find so ironic. Like, one, it's really annoying because the reason
just
you're probably...
call me if you're going to drone on.
And also when you're like trying to like look at it when you're doing something else and you're like, well, I can't look at it now because like I can't listen to it. I haven't got the moment to listen to it.
Amazing. That's a terrific effort, Suzanna, honestly, for an off-the-cuff Resell Me a Pen challenge to round out a great episode of the show talking to us about peak season. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. It was a pleasure.
And thank you very much for having me.
And that concludes this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. A big thank you to my guest this week, Suzanna Chaplin, the CEO and founder of esbconnect, for joining me to talk all about peak shopping season and how marketers, brands, and advertisers can make the most out of it. I thought there were some very interesting insights there about the benefits of email and SMS as opposed to things like social media, and understanding which data points you need to worry about and what results you should be seeking at this time of year, and taking a long-term approach in what is often a season orientated around the short term, I think was very, very insightful. So a big thank you to Suzanna. And you can get more of her insights in PMW's Retail Playbook, which is live on the website now, available to all PMW subscribers. We have 4 chapters, all live on the website. So you can go to the performance marketing world and dive in deeper to peak season if you are so inclined. Thank you, of course, to you, the loyal listener, for tuning in each and every week as you do. We will be back, of course, in 7 days' time with another episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Don't forget, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice and give us some love on social media. We post full episodes, clips, and other highlights across LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, and the website. With all that said, have an amazing week, and you'll be hearing from me again very shortly. Bye for now.